My name is Chris McCarthy with the Innovation Learning Network, and really excited to launch this Design for Dignity webinar series with an S at the end, because this is the first one, but this is not the last one. When we left some of you, and I'd be curious at some point to see how many of you came to the Boston meeting back in June versus how many are here for the first time. But when we saw you last, which was in person in Boston, it was abundantly clear by the end of our time together that that community, our community, wanted to keep going. And so Amy and I started thinking through this, and not only are we thinking about Design for Dignity Part 2, which we'll say a little bit more about at the end of this session, but we also are launching this webinar series to keep our community connected and learning together. And next slide. Oh, that's me. A few things. One, we have two fabulous speakers, and they come from our keynotes from our Boston gathering. And these are, I would say, probably, not that I want to say I have favorite children, but of the many keynotes and speakers that we had over the 3-day period, these two for sure raised to the top in terms of both beloved and provocative. And I'm excited to get a little bit of both of that, as both of these folks are going to remix their keynotes for us today. If you have questions, we're going to ask you to use the Q&A feature of Zoom. Amy will moderate that, even though she's also the speaker for today's event. So unfortunately, we are working out some kinks. This is our first webinar together, and we're kind of getting the rust out of our abilities here. So Amy will be moderating that. Hopefully at the end of both talks, we'll have a little bit of time for open conversation, perhaps making some connections between the two different talks as well. And then finally, we are recording this, so just FYI, and that way you'll be able to share this with others afterwards if you are so inclined. So with that, let's see here. And I am stuck. Here we go. Good. So without further ado, I am excited to reintroduce to you, first of all, my co-producer from Design for Dignity, that gathering in Boston that I just referenced. Amy is just an incredibly inspirational leader, has so much skill and talent in the design space. Again, her keynote, so many folks came up afterwards and was like, can we get the recording? And the answer was no, because we didn't record it. But finally, we are able to offer this to you to be recorded and to be shared. So Amy, I'm going to hand this over to you to say a little bit more about yourself and to take us away.
Thanks so much, Chris. It's so crazy because the time when it went by in a blink. It seems like it was June just yesterday, and the just amazing feeling of being surrounded by like-minded people who are dedicated in terms of their mission and where their heart's at to incorporate dignity, ethics, human centricity, inclusion, and social impact into the work that they do. It was so encouraging and invigorating, and I feel like I'm still surfing on a high from that, and it was months and months ago. So happy to be here with you again today. Just gonna share my screen here. Chris, are we good? Could you give me a thumbs up? We're good? Okay, Super
Yeah,
duper.
just I'm seeing a lot of action in the Q&A. Basically, folks are letting us know that chat is not working. So just make that one last announcement before we start, that chat right now is not working. So we'll have to use the Q&A. So put your questions in there and we will monitor.
Yeah, and we'll try to fix that for next time. I was hunting around on WebEx looking for the setting. I couldn't figure it out. So for next time, we will do that, because the community that I was just discussing that was established at the conference, we want that to continue. So we really want folks to be able to connect in the chat and afterwards, and via the LinkedIn group as well, which Chris will talk about later. So yes, thank you so much for joining today, and spending your lunch if you're on the East Coast, or coffee if you're on the West Coast, or maybe dinner or cocktail if you're over in Europe, spending your time with us. I've spent my career focused on human-centered design and health, and the intersection of the two, specifically looking at health outcomes and also business results. And I care deeply about social impact and ethical responsibility. And how do we show up for the people we serve? What is the social contract we have with the people we serve? And I think folks have an intuitive sense of what is design for dignity. What does designing for dignity mean? But I want to explore that topic a little bit more here with you today. And you may find some points that I'm making provocative, or you may disagree with some, or you might believe that it's common sense. But I hope you find something in here to take away with you. And I'll just share an anecdote from the conference. Chris mentioned that, a lot of people loved what I had to say, or what was happening at the conference, but there was a person who walked out and was like, I just don't get it. I'm out of here. So there's there's always there's always folks who disagree, and that's fine. We welcome that. But point is, it's a discussion and a dialogue. So as I mentioned, I'm a designer. I always have been, and I always will be. I believe that design gives us a lens through which we can imagine a better way, and that design paints a picture of what's possible. I like this definition by Charles Eames, who was an architect. And he said, design is a plan for arranging elements in such a way as best to accomplish a particular purpose. The focus on purpose here is key. What are the outcomes we're seeking from a health perspective, from a social, organizational, financial, and personal perspective? What is driving the pursuit of the outcomes that we're looking for? And what kind of experiences are we hoping to manifest for the people we serve ultimately? What principles, what process is guiding us? And this is where dignity comes in. I think it's so important to start at the end. Sometimes having kind of open-ended blue sky or greenfield thinking seems like an unnecessary creative exercise, or something that we don't have the time or luxury to endeavor into, but it helps us to point in a given direction. It puts all of our creative and analytical energies toward imagining what could be. And so I think it's super important. Share a story here with you. I was fortunate enough to care for my amazing mother before she passed away in 2020. And through that time, I was able to experience hospice care, what hospice care is like, how it's delivered. Now, in hospice, everything is designed to add more life to your days, as opposed to adding more days to your life. The focus is on meaning, relationship, and joy, and finding those things even amidst a very difficult situation. Every healthcare worker that we came across had empathy, but the system itself was designed to provide human support during an extremely difficult time. And this enabled the humans in the system to bring their best to every situation. When we're suffering or caring for those who are suffering, we feel vulnerable and dignity comes into clear focus. But this experience started me along the path of thinking deeply about dignity and how dignity extends to all people and our entire human experience. So the word dignity comes from the Latin dignitas, meaning worth, worthiness, and is basically the right of a person to be valued and respected for their own sake and to be treated ethically. And in health, we know clinicians take the Hippocratic Oath, which expresses their ethical commitment to doing no harm and also ensuring dignity. The word dignity is in the Hippocratic Oath. And whether we're a clinician or not, in the health system, I believe everyone can aspire to the same commitment because our actions, our department's actions, our organization's actions, and our industry's actions have an impact. So experiences of indignity and dignity can be easy to spot. Is an experience or a situation making someone feel excluded or included, harmed or supported, devalued or valued, judged or respected, locked out or invited, ignored or trusted, ignored or engaged, mistrusted or trusted, belittled or encouraged, controlled or empowered, brushed off or accompanied, shamed or forgiven, marginalized or elevated. And the consumer centric experiences that we're all trying to design in the health ecosystem, even the experiences we notice every day as we're interacting with various organizations inside and outside of health. The difference is in health, somebody might be having the worst day of their lives. They may be at a pivotal moment where they've received very bad news, or the emotional stakes may be extremely high. And so these emotions, these feelings are extremely important to consider because they shape the context that somebody is experiencing a situation. So I've always believed that cognitive empathy, which is understanding the situation of another, and emotional empathy, which is feeling for another, are essential to the practice of human-centered design. And to take it one step farther, I've heard compassion be described as empathy in action, the act of simply being present, or said differently, breathing with another person. This presence to me is the embodiment of respect for a person and the moment. And it's the guiding principle of respecting the wisdom of the lived experiences of our fellow humans. It's understanding how being with them through the design process, through co-creation, through participatory design, through taking an inclusive stance can both inspire us and ensure dignity. But is empathy enough to help us deliver the best possible human experience? Can we teach empathy? Can we codify empathy? Can we measure empathy or its impact? How do we ensure that empathy fully inspires the experiences we deliver, the processes we adopt, and the policies that we enact? So I believe a focus on moral philosophy, ethics, and human dignity can take empathy one step farther, can change the conversation, can guide us towards principles that will help us define our purpose and measure it. So does the next evolution call us to be ethicists? Yes, still yes. And I believe that moral philosophy and ethics provide a way for both individuals and organizations to infuse empathy into the system through principles and measurement. And this focus is going to help us to address dehumanization, protect human rights, reduce harm, codify respect, elevate experiences, and design for positive impact. And there are many more lenses through which we can explore the concept of dignity, including the economic, the spiritual, and the psychological. I'm a huge fan of exploring these lenses and associated frameworks, and I'm happy to share some of those with you here today. So at this point, talking about ethics and empathy and human-centered design, some folks are like, okay, what about business? This is all happy stuff, but what about business? So I love this quote from Charles Dickens in A Christmas Carol when Scrooge says, "Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business." I believe we should attempt to solve business problems and evolve our businesses and our roles within our businesses and organizations, public and private, to the greatest extent possible in order to focus on positive human outcomes. I believe that we can find that virtuous circle between what organizations are hoping to achieve and what people are hoping to achieve in their own lives. So philosopher Kant pointed out in 1785 that people are not mere objects in a capitalist system. He said, in the realm of the ends, everything has either a price or a dignity. Something that has a price can be exchanged for something else of equal value, whereas that which exceeds all price and therefore admits no equivalent has a dignity. And this is where corporate social responsibility, conscious capitalism, triple P bottom line, and shared value creation come into play, asking us to consider who are we responsible to and what are we responsible for. And this extends traditional fiduciary responsibility to shareholders into ECG, which is economy for the common good, and also donut economics, which is what you see here, where we look after providing for the needs of humans and organizations within the center of the donut, but without overshooting the natural bounds of our planet where we live. And this focus affects nonprofits as well, as they look out to ensure consideration for the systems that they are interconnected with as well. And all of this is important because people are not externalities. It can be difficult to shift our focus, but considering the social contract your organization has with the people you serve, both inside and outside of the organization, it can be a great start. What do they expect of you? There's increasing opportunities for convergence and collaboration across stakeholders and businesses. And this moves us beyond traditional business products, services, and relationships, and leads us to think about new ways of measuring success so that we can design a better future in the present. I believe design without inclusion is injustice. And we can find out in collaboration with the people who are affected by the solutions we create what matters most to them. We can design so as not to lock anyone out of an experience in principle and in practice, to ensure equity and to address bias. And this means designing with people as opposed to for people, engaging in participatory design and decision making to democratize and liberate power structures, like participatory budgeting, for example, which is in a government context. Participatory budgeting is when the citizens can decide directly, engaged in the process of deciding directly how certain funds will be spent, or engaged in the decision-making process directly. These approaches help us to ensure that the lived experiences the contexts, the attitudes, perceptions, and behaviors of the people we serve all shape the solutions we create. And this helps us design not just for access, but for human thriving, because why not shoot for that? We want to ease suffering, but we also want to help people to thrive. And to do that, we need to look at the whole person, not just to account for their disability, but for their ability. So shifting to the governance lens, the UN declared the importance of dignity and human rights post-World War II in a Declaration of Human Rights that said, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. And even today, where the UN has set forth sustainable development goals, which is what you see here, and these goals address human rights, health, justice, and sustainability. And what you notice as you investigate them is the overlap between them, because everything is interconnected into a system. One thing can affect the next. And then there's the humanist lens. Humanist magazine defines humanism as a rational philosophy informed by science, inspired by art, and motivated by compassion. Affirming the dignity of each human being, it supports the maximization of individual liberty and opportunity consonant with social and planetary responsibility. And of course, we're all in the design world and in the health world familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. To flip to psychology, Maslow's hierarchy, as we know, provides us a view of where to begin in terms of harm reduction and positive impact, building from a solid foundation. I'm also a huge fan of self-determination theory. So a lot of the people who have shaped my career spend time investigating motivational psychology and behavior science. But self-determination theory says that autonomy, competence, and relatedness are core to human motivation. So for the experiences, the systems, and the solutions we design to be effective, we need to consider these factors. Now, relatedness points to the desire for human beings to feel a sense of belonging. Competence is whether I feel like I can be successful in a given system. And is it challenging to keep me engaged, but not so much that I sort of check out? And then autonomy, do I have the agency to select my path and control over my own destiny? There's also the wellness wheel. This wellness wheel, you may have seen, it looks at the whole person and encourages us to focus on the whole person. Any one of our organizations might be focused on just one piece of this, but then again, because people are complicated and we have so many different facets to our lives, and all of the systems that each of these areas exists within are interconnected, it's important to look at the complete picture. And this reminds me of something my mom says, and I'm actually going to introduce you to her in a video that I'll show you later. But she said the doctor treated me like a whole person, not just a body, but someone with a heart and with a soul. And I mentioned this interconnection, but we know life affects health. For example, caregiver stress increases the likelihood of substance abuse, as an example. And health affects life. For example, a new diagnosis can turn life completely upside down. And this reminds you of the wellness wheel, maybe. This is the social determinants of health poster, social drivers of health poster that GoInvo has created. And it reminds us how everything can impact a person's health and their access, their opportunities, their outcomes. And I love this quote from Desmond Tutu, which is, there comes a point where we need to stop just pulling people out of the river. We need to go upstream and find out why they're falling in. And this speaks to prevention, but also, logically understanding impacts and the chain of events. In playing it forward, we can anticipate or attempt to anticipate unintended consequences so that we can plan to avoid the worst circumstances and hopefully achieve the best ones. And so thinking about what outcomes we desire is really important. And then stepping back to what actions are going to impact those outcomes that we're looking at. We want to avoid downward spirals that harm. This is an example of a downward spiral. I did some work in futures thinking, looking at future of foster care. And this is the current state of the foster care system, where one negative impact can lead to another, can lead to another, can lead to another, and can lead to intergenerational harm. So the task that I had in this was to look at creating a virtuous circle instead for foster care system that would uplift. But that's our job as designers, is to find these virtuous circles in the systems that we're a part of, in the systems that we're designing. I remember 20, 25 years ago when we were designing the internet, um, we were systems thinkers. It wasn't just about the digital medium. It wasn't just about the aesthetic. We were designing how human beings would interact with this new technology. And this is where we are now, as we're considering how humans are going to interact with AI, how we're considering how human beings are going to interact with each other. So as we know, it's not just about boxes and arrows and pixels. It's about a whole lot more than that. Another example of a framework is in futures thinking, and we saw a lot of futures thinking at the Design for Dignity conference. It's a way to project ourselves into the future and look at what are the possible, plausible, and preferable futures. You can look at a 2x2 matrix, but you can also look at cascading impacts. And I love futures thinking because there's no data from the future. It is an analytical activity, but it also engages our creative process. And the final method I'd love to put in front of you is called rigorous imagining. Elise Boulding did a rigorous imagination activity at a conference where she encouraged everyone to close their eyes and imagine what a world of peace looks like. What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What's happening around you? And this is important because it's really easy to imagine the apocalypse. It's really easy to look around and find a multitude of things that are upsetting. However, we can challenge ourselves to think about the positive things that we can hopefully participate in causing to happen. And that's the momentum of a movement. So my goal is to help people move from surviving to thriving, to design for human flourishing, and to design systems that do that. So when thinking about how do we design for dignity, I think it's important to infuse joy, inspire hope, support goals, promote respect, and reduce harm. So this is my framework that I developed to help to think about how we go about designing for dignity. So first off, starting at the bottom, Maslow's hierarchy style, thinking about reducing harm. Do we cause harm? Have we thought about the harm we cause? Have we measured the harm we cause? How can we stop the harm we cause? So from situational stress to medical bankruptcy to disproportionately poor outcomes, how do we design to take a trauma-informed stance, ensure systemic equality, address bias, and reduce the negative impact that an organization has on people, community, society, and the planet? And then next, how do we promote respect? How do we listen more, build trust, and respond well? So do we foster a culture of humane treatment as opposed to policies that might be limiting? Sometimes the the things that have a big impact are those policies. So how do we put a focus on those policies and the human to human connection in the right moments? And finally, supporting goals. What do people want most in their lives? How do we help them achieve it? From finding healing for a loved one to living with more energy to having better relationships, how do we support these goals? And, this moves us beyond transactional elements of an experience or utilitarian experiences. It encourages us to reach out to support the entire person, the entire experience beyond the traditional bounds. So, what future is possible? How do we help people dream? Now, this is where we can start inspiring hope. People will only attempt to achieve that which they feel is possible in their lives. So, if we're able to inspire hope, we can open up new possibilities for folks and help to paint with them a picture of what is possible. And finally, to infuse joy, think about what brings people joy. How do we design for more joy? Even when there's suffering, there can be joy. For example, in a children's hospital where children might spend days, weeks, months, are they going to lose out on their childhood? Or can we also figure out a way to help kids to laugh, to play, and to explore? What is good? What is beautiful? What can be celebrated? What magic can be woven or enabled? I think I'm out of time, so I will put I'll email out for you guys a link to that video I mentioned of my mom. It's so inspiring. Um, but I ask you today, what commitment do you want to make personally, right? This can be how you show up every day to your peers, in your workplace, to your family, in your homes. It can be a passion project, a side gig, a volunteer opportunity, but what commitment is going to guide you? So one way that you can figure out the personal commitment that you're ready to make is through this designer's oath. This is actually an exploration that was invented by Sierra Taylor and Samantha Dempsey, colleagues of mine at MadPow. And it's a great way to kind of think about what matters most to you. And you don't have to fill in a Mad Lib, right? You can also just think about it yourself, but it's important to take time to reflect on why we're doing what we're doing. Also, with Ben Little, a colleague of mine at Massachusetts College of Art and Design, we created a Design for Dignity workshop canvas. This is an activity that can be done with teams to think about how dignity can be incorporated into your work. So the QR code is actually here, but again, I'll try to get the resources to you, the video, the designer's oath, and this Design for Dignity workshop canvas. But I would encourage you to go where the love is and be the love. Love drives action. It rearranges our priorities. It leads us to do things we didn't know were possible. And where the love is where the hope is. So that's what I'd like to leave you with today. Thank you.
So powerful again, to hear these words of wisdom on how to think about dignity, how to start activating that in our own lives as we're doing this kind of work with the community. We're going to hold questions until the end. So if you have questions for Amy, please jot them down. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce Juhan Sonin. He was by far maybe the person who lit Design for Dignity on fire. His wisdom in this space really got to a lot of us, right to our soul. So excited to re-present him yet again. He is the director at GoInvo, and I enjoy even more that he describes himself as creative sandpaper. So without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to Juhan.
Thank you, Chris. And Amy's healthcare poetry ASMR. I just let that seep into my brainstem. It's that I think that kindness strategy should be in our brains more, which dovetails into my sort of tickling with a sledgehammer technique. If you want these slides right now, you can go to designagenda.org. It should get you right to Dropbox. Yeah, I pretend to design here. I sort of teach at this venture capital firm. Uh, Man, this is a high mortality rate story. But if you want to get a hold of me within a couple of business hours, I will try to get back to you. And because we're in healthcare, here's what's influencing my brain. Uh, Look, uh, I think many designers and engineers are struggling and have struggled for a while here of like, what the hell do I want to do? And great, I see this and I hear this, so I want to have this impact. Okay, well, where the hell do you start? And you get blasted by, there are so many problems in healthcare. It's a big space. So where do you go? What do you start to do? And if you're buried sometimes as someone working at a big company or even a startup, you just have to start making your own stuff. And this is the way I started. I just wanted to, I didn't know what was happening in my wetware and my body. So I had this checkup accidentally at a big company in one of these sort of nursing stations. And, bug-eyed, the nurse was floored that I was a functioning human being. And it got me thinking, I have no insight of what the frick is happening in this mess. There's no dipstick. So I came up with this, health card. Um, it's not the thing. It's not amazing or anything like that. But look, no one's asked for this. No department said, "Hey, make this shit." Um, no one funded it. There are a couple of us that worked on it, and we just did it. But I started using it across all my clinical visits. It was in my pocket all the time for years. Um, and it was open source. Other people have used it. That's a whole other story. But ultimately, for us, it started to drive the technical inputs of well, how is the data formatted? Is there some standard we can use? And we used it ultimately as this health card as a validation service for other digital services we were making in the health world, and it begat other projects. That's pretty great. And ultimately, we had a great meeting with some CEOs of hospitals and said, "Oh, we want that. So how do we operationalize it?" And once it got to the lawyers, whose knee-jerk reaction is, "No way in hell are we going to do some kind of self-service thing at a hospital?" But we started to make this stuff. Um, so that's my little my hope here is that things that you make, it can actually spawn other things. In this case, there are three projects we were doing almost simultaneously at the MITRE Corporation, all open source, like it was the first health data testing service for EMRs in the US. H-Data ultimately was folded into FHIR. But these things started to move. Not that these infected the JSON report or meaningful use, but there's maybe a 0.01% shift because of them. And that's okay when you do projects like this, because they will birth other things. And all these things came out of those couple projects and those few designs. And I think that's pretty righteous. Apparently, we can also design circles pretty well. But offshoots of your work, I mean, expect it, hope for it. That is a potentially great output because delightful services come from many different places, and you're planting this seed. And that is also part of an agenda. Now, we live in this health risk averse world in healthcare, and Boston honestly has gotten even more health risk averse over the past decade, I'd say. We make money in all sorts of bad ways. IRBs do not move. We've outsourced care, and look, their lives on the line, so it makes it hard. Okay, but that doesn't mean we have to get everything okayed by everyone. So when you're making new things or ideas are brain farted, don't get in this locked zone of hearing, oh shit, my colleague or my department head or the VP or the CEO said no. You're gonna hear it all the time, and it's gonna shut your brain down. Screw that noise, because you have to build. This is the key thing about designers. We build things, it then impacts people, and that's how you make impact then. Planetary across the planet or in your neighborhood. Again, you're going to hear no a lot. Just start. And you don't wait for the huge studies. You don't wait for everything to line up. That never happens. So you just have to move and then shift your tactics, because people are going to get in your way, or you're going to get in your own way. Move. And then something will stick, and it may change completely. That's also pretty rad. But just go, and then stick to your core values, your ethic when you do it. So when you're in the slog to create really beautiful things, you ultimately want to aim for, okay, people who use the stuff that you're building at your company. You and your own team deserve some design engineering love. And there's this thing called the place you live, right? As we're all sort of in the tornado of right now. And I think there are good examples that we all have done probably in this space. For me, we work a lot with the state of Massachusetts and with Health and Human Services and CMS, Medicaid and Medicare. One example is, hey, we've worked on food stamps. Not just we, but the state of Massachusetts. We did a lot of work on this as a design firm. And what I'm not going to go into the design, but really the outcome, the things that turn the tide for other humans, is that, look, at the beginning of this, very few people did it online. It was a pain in the ass by design. It still could be better and more lubricated. But by year 2, that's pretty big jump for applying online, and you're via fax. And now 1 million people are on Snap. Now that's not because the application is necessarily higher. That's a little separate problem. But we've gone tenfold in just a handful of years, and that to me is really good progress. How do we make sure that you can get food stamps in days or hours, not in weeks or months? And yet, when we were doing this project, we're like, okay, well, we can't just think about healthcare, SNAP benefits, food stamps. We have to think about all these things together. And it just so happened that a couple years before, the little, small note to the legislator by Massachusetts HHS department chief said, we need to think about an eligibility engine. They didn't use those words, but some kind of integrated eligibility. So, hey, I can do Medicaid and SNAP and TANF, all these little services, or not so little services, in one application. How do I just have this core thing come to me? And so we're like, hey, we need to do this for the state. And so we continue to pluck away at this, even though at the time Snap didn't adopt it, but we had to keep going. When you hear no the first time, you keep going. And so finally, I think now, last year, Massachusetts started to prototype, and they're not piloting it this year. Fantastic. That's progress. And if you want in our country to actually change health outcomes, it often helps to change the damn law. So, yes, these are my take. They're probably not representative of yours, but I started and have been doing this to say, what do I want my policies to be for me, for my countrymen, for the residents who live here? Jeffrey, it's designagenda.org. And this is my first cut at it for this year. We actively work on this. I do, and some of my colleagues do. But you need to start an agenda, and you need to see that from the policy angle as well, not just hey, this is really crappy design over here, but also what does the neighborhood need, the city, the state, the nation. I also, hey, crap changes during the year. Right. So look, I applied for, the ARPA H. I didn't get it. It's on our website if you want to see it. I've open sourced everything there. The National Health Literacy Agency. I don't know. Maybe RFK will do that. Maybe that's just still fantasy. But look, I've done other things in the meanwhile, is still working on how we can own our data. It starts in many different ways, from, hey, there's a paper. Hey, we made an open source comic. And I also published the policy for Massachusetts of how it could be implemented. You can see all this here, by the way, but it doesn't just start. It didn't start with that either. And this is a longer road. It started with on GitHub. Uh, Kathy Mick, a lawyer, ex-CMS lawyer, and a few of us said, okay, well, how should we have a patient data use agreement? And it was crafted and put on GitHub. It was a great paper that was written about 3 ways to get to patient data ownership and better health. We created then an open source prototype of how do you show patients what they're getting? Why should they give a rat's ass? Then there's the paper, the comic, and all these other stuff. But again, it's a lineage. It doesn't stand on its own. There are always other tendrils to your project. So, and this is for me to say, start with the end in mind. Know that it's a slog. Know you have to get there through many different routes. I think over the next couple of years, maybe a handful, maybe the next generation, we're going to see these sort of layers of how do we get closer and closer to single payer or some kind of healthcare for all. Many don't know that if you go into a Medicare Disadvantage program, so that on purpose, that sometimes there are a few cases where you cannot switch back to Medicare, plain old Medicare. That's insane. But people don't know this when they get into it. That's just one example. And then I have something that's like, hey, what's your system engineering take on this? What are the things that we should be fighting for as residents of this country? Again, you're not going to agree with these, but these are my list. I have more. I won't bore you with them now, but this is how I think about it. These over the past 3 weeks have come into play. I mean, hell, I think it would have been a much different conversation if we just said, hell, Puerto Rico, get your ass into our Senate and Congress and have voting rights. And everything about bots should not have free speech. So you have to start an agenda, and you got to maybe start with a policy list, maybe, but you need some kind of way to think about what's the system you want to tackle. Then since June, since Amy, Chris, and I were talking about this, okay, we've done other crap. I only got through a part of this, and there's a reason why the character's there, but that was totally inconsequential and random. It's a good book, by the way. But in contrast to that, when I went to VP Harris's site, I couldn't see clearly her policies. It wasn't near as clear as what the Heritage Foundation has done over years. So I said, okay, screw it. I'm going to start, reading every section. I'm going to have a GPT couldn't scrape it. So then I read it, I copied it, I had GPT summarize it, I re-edited it, I reinterpreted it. And ultimately, I came up with, hey, here's what I think this huge, long policy treatise was on the VP's website. I just think it's useful to see in simple terms. Ralph Nader had a great button that Naderites wore that had 10 policies. You could see very clearly where you stood. It was yes, no answers. So for me, it's like, hey, maybe if I posterize this, I did this a month ago. I sent it to the DNC. Of course, they didn't give a shit. But it's one of these things, one of these activities that, hey, my brain's in the game. I'm moving it. I'm publishing it. It's open source. Let's go. A lot of open source things die too, like this. So I put this together. Now it doesn't matter as much, but it's something I did in the meanwhile. The second thing was, hey, let's actually get our act together and come up with a treatise for what should the eligibility engine in Massachusetts be. So if you go to masseligibility.com, you can see our thesis of how it should act, how it should work. We even put together a common data set for what does a resident of Massachusetts need to sort of participate in this sort of beautiful service that comes to me and says, hey, Juhan, you're eligible for X, Y, and Z. That's how I want stuff to work, is it should know me a little bit. As part of residency, hey, these 5 data points, 10, are part of my residency in Massachusetts. It gets me a lot. And so we put this together. It's all available, all open source. And what's great is, who knew, but there are 11 districts in Massachusetts that actually had a non-binding question in this vote. Hey, should this is an unmistakably clear message that District 14 and others really want their representatives to consider this, to contemplate the possibility of not shitting on an unlikely bill that probably won't arise to support universal health care. But you have to start somewhere, and they moved. This is critical. So when you're designing this kind of thing, you have to just start. You got to make things. You have to live this design. You have to live with what you're proving. You need the civic stamina. Things take years to manifest, but you also have to start today, and you have to really fight for it. Yes, it's complicated. It's messy. It's freaking hard. But, you know, like American democracy, healthcare is resilient. And I think what we design today will look much, much, much different in the future. I've stolen from most of these people here, and if you have any questions, just fire away and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks very much.
Juhan, once again, just amazing. Your tips to move this forward really get at the heart of so many healthcare conversations, which is conversations for paralysis. And so your wisdom and your tips to get started, make something, even if it's just for yourself, to get that creative process moving is so appreciative. So we have about 7 minutes for conversations. If you'd like to raise your hand, I can actually unmute you so you could ask your question live, or you can post it in the Q&A and Amy will handle that side of it. So if you raise your hand, I'll unmute you. If you put your question into Q&A, she'll deal with that. So any questions or thoughts on what you just heard?
And I know folks were wondering about the slides and the resources, so we'll post those in the LinkedIn group, and I'm going to drop a link to that group in the as an answer to a question, which I hope you all can see. So Juhan, I know next up we're planning on exploring the future of primary care and what primary care might look like or not look like, considering the capability of AI and the patient need for support throughout their healthcare journey. So Juhan and I, along with Mass Health Quality Partners, are looking at future of primary care. We're setting out to do a series of activities, including a workshop and a dinner, to start thinking about this so that it doesn't just happen to us, but that we actually set forth some guidelines and considerations that hopefully can be taken up in a open source kind of creative good type of way. So if you're interested in learning more about that, at Amy Heymans at Beneficent.design. And again, I'll include that in the resources post on the Design for Dignity.
Great. We have a question from, I think a question from Daniel Dow. I'm going to unmute you. Go ahead, Daniel.
Hi, thanks. I'm a physician, radiologist. I definitely agree with a lot of what you were saying. I was curious, well, first of all, about the patient data. I was curious if you had heard of a startup called Lemur Health, but it's a patient-centric EMR. If you're not aware of that, I could definitely send you information and connect you with the founder. And then the other thing, considering the recent election and, the probability that Robert Kennedy will have, some kind of central role, health czar, whatever it is, and how that's going to affect policy. I'm curious how, your vision for universal health care, how that works within a political system, that's as dysfunctional as it is, or if you have a different, vision for universal health care. So that's the question. Thank you.
Well, I have no idea what Lemur Healthcare is. Interesting name. The one-page website doesn't give me much. So if you have, Daniel, any intel, fire away. I'll be happy to sniff it. The universal care comes in lots of different shades, colors. flavors. It's and so part of this is what can we achieve? Can we start? I mean, a more actionable potential one is, can we drop Medicare age by 5 years every 5 years or something like that, right? That would be one thing to do. I'm not stuck solely on one plan will rule them all, meaning like, hey, if we only have single payer, it'll work. If we only have universal, because those are actually two different things. But the treatise should be, if you step on U.S. soil, you get healthcare. And so I'm polyamorous when it comes to the policy in order to get closer to what that means. And maybe that's a whole separate conversation that needs a 20-minute tech talk on it. Reasonable question. I don't have a reasonable answer.
Then we have
I think most of us are stuck on that question. However, as you look over the large time periods, we keep getting closer and closer. Like each decade, there's some adjustment that's made to the health programs, up and down, but the trajectory is more and more care, whether it's at city levels, state levels. There are multiple states that are considering single payer systems. California is currently debating that. San Francisco, we have universal health care here in this city. So there are pockets where it is happening for sure.
And it's interesting too to consider with AI and with when you consider what AI might enable at a lower cost, perhaps more continuity. I mean, the economic forces may contribute to everything that Juhan was talking about over time, or things, could evolve. And then also the also wanting to provide human support to folks, peer support, and not necessarily a doctor or a nurse, but another human who's expert in navigating those types of resources, especially in community-based organizations, can be helpful. So I think we're going to see new models evolve over time. So we have one more question, and that is, what are some things each of you will be working on over the next 4 years to help design for the preferable futures? I can think of two. One is the future of primary care discussion that Juhan and Mass Health Quality Partners and some others are going to be pushing forward. Another is I'm on the board of Co-Design Collaborative. Co-Design Collaborative is a nonprofit dedicated to exploring the transformative power of design. And through Co-Design Collaborative, there's teaching and workshops and all sorts of amazing community activities taking place. So if you haven't checked out that org, check it out. Hoping to drive some really good ripples through that organization, as well as Design for Dignity. I mean, for me, I like to nourish people so that they can do the work that they want to do. But my heart's with futures thinking, health, and social impact. So I'm sure I'll be up to some stuff. How about you, Chris?
Yeah, so some of you have heard of the work that I've been doing in Sonoma County, which is this intersection of systems thinking and human-centered design. That has just got picked up by Stanford to co-develop a community-based impact accelerator, which will expand systems thinking, design thinking, and futures thinking together into one framework that is really kind of hyper local. So that is, we're trying to keep our heads down locally so that we can have bigger impact across our system. So that's what I'll be doing for the next few years for sure. And maybe we'll end with Juhan. Anything on your horizon you'd like to share?
Okay, one thing that is bothering the hell out of me is that if you have one thing is self-care on your digital robot in your pocket, right, or digital doctor in your pocket, but really when it comes to making sure that your bathroom or your home life is more of a laboratory when you're sick, so that you can do DXing very fast at home with a remote doctor and the doctor in your pocket. Those little services instantly mailed to your house day of that are physical that map to digital, I think are really important. And I'm looking forward to that exploding in the next like 2 years. We've gotten some drips and drabs, but I really want like the whole suite to come to my house, like as I need it, as it's finding things.
That's great. So we are just a little bit over time. So thank you, Amy and Juhan, for once again sharing your wisdom and this space and really kicking off the Design for Dignity web series, I think, in exactly the way that we wanted to. For those of you who are still with us, want to apologize that we're running a little late. We will try to stay on time in the future, but just a few things. The next webinar is on January 23rd, focus on systems design and adverse childhood experiences. So details coming soon. You'll register in the same way you registered for this one. Amy and I are heads down thinking and planning for Design Dignity 2025. It'll probably be a little bit later in the year. We're trying to get that all zhuzhed up in the next month or two. So expect to hear more about that. And then also know that you are welcome to join our open group on LinkedIn. It's called Design for Dignity. So if you just type in Design for Dignity, you'll see the pop-up group and go ahead and join that. It's where you can stay in touch with all that we are doing. So with that, thank you everybody for joining us. And again, thank you, Juhan and Amy, for your wisdom. More to come.